Hey folks, welcome back to Carmel. Welcome to our third tape. We're beginning to number these. Thank you, Sep. And the desire. You have a desire for God. Maybe not God, but do you have a desire for peace, happiness? Do you have a desire to, when you live your life, do you want to accumulate wealth, matter? Do you want to accumulate pleasurable experiences? Are you thinking more in terms of living a life of significance, looking for your niche in life? Desires. I want to start with, we talk about this in the spiritual world. We talk about this in Carmel. So I want to give you a short map of knowledge and what was on the map that is not always on the map today, but the map of knowledge, the map that was being read by John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila in the 1500s. The Middle Ages. What were other people thinking before Martin Luther, before they had automobiles? They were thinking in terms of drawing closer to God. But they didn't start with God. They started with creation, and we'll do the same. Fire. You know that if you draw closer to fire, as you draw closer to the source of that fire, you're drawing closer to light and heat, the flame. And it will draw hotter. So what you're receiving from that fire, you'll receive a greater quantity of it, a quantum. The scope of that fire will increase. I walk closer to a bomb fire, I can get so close and it gets too hot. It's the same with, you reverse it. As you draw away from that fire, the attributes of that fire will diminish. They'll lessen. They'll get less and less and less. I'm walking away from the fire, the burning building, the heat diminishes. The light diminishes. And you can imagine how if you go so far that you won't be able to see anything. Now, that's natural law. That's what people experienced in caveman days, cavewoman days, way back in the beginning. So what's that have to do with the desire that we want to talk about with God? Well, it's the same with God. It's your DIY. Oftentimes people who are listening to this are doing it yourself, or you're supplementing something you're receiving from a spiritual guide, a spiritual leader, and or you're out there by yourself, floundering about. This is for the DIY, do it yourself. Remember, there's hope. The little flower did it, DIY. She did it herself with the Holy Spirit. Just ask God, God guide me. But that God guides you doesn't mean there are not, it's like on a highway, there's not the main traveled portion, and then there is the ditch with a lot of nasty stuff. I suppose you can travel in a ditch up a mountain, but it's a rough way to go. So if there's the main traveled portion of the highway, do you want to know where it's at? That's what this is about. Desiring God, as you draw closer to God, the desires of God will grow stronger, and as you go away from God, the desires will lessen. And that's Thomas Aquinas. Now, because because God is unseen, what does he look like? How is he operating? We begin to ask ourselves, what does God mean to you? Because we're going to be talking about prayer. We're going to be talking about sacraments, graces, experience of God in prayer, experience of God in grace, meaning an experience of God through what we call the sacramental life or the sacramentals. And if you're Christian, you'll understand it. But if you're not Christian, you might not understand it. And these tapes at the beginning level for everybody. So God has what we call God is loving and knowing. As you approach God, I want you to consider that if you you can in a remote way put God on through patience, through endurance. You will become a better person, a more good person. You'll see by a way you know not. So as you're drawing and you desire, and you're not certain what that desire is, but you have an emptiness. And you've drank from all kinds of pleasure, and that hasn't satisfied you. You've got 3 red Corvettes. That hasn't satisfied you. Maybe there's an immaterial world. Maybe there's a world that other generations have lived in. And on the map of John of the Cross, on the map in the Middle Ages of Teresa of Avila, on the map of Carmel, there is this place we call God, and we go towards that through our desires in the beginning. And God gives you those little unctions. He will give you those little encouragements. Even when it's the most darkest, and right around the next corner, you endure, you pray. Be a very simple way to pray. Just say, God, I'm looking for you. God, I seek you. And we've got a lot of tapes on prayer. I think we've got Attorney Jean talking about prayer. We've got several. Don't we have several? Yes. Okay, we got several videos on prayer. Just check one out. Communicate with God. God, I want more of you. Whatever that God may mean for you. Now, at this level, at the beginning level, as we refine it, I'll be true. My job is to be true to the Catholic tradition, John of the Cross tradition, but it's like a cone. It's like a funnel. I'm starting very, very wide and not very where the funnel tapers to the end. Very, very short and small. And I'm not talking about very specifics now. I'm talking about broad generalities. So you're going to draw closer to God. You have a desire, and you don't know who that God is. Like Paul said, let me tell you, you have these unknown gods. Let me tell you about the unknown God. I just want you to understand that you can draw closer to God through the practice of virtue. John of the Cross is very specific. The number one virtue to practice if you're in a fog and you don't know where to turn is patience. Because as the virtue of patience, it's like rubbing two sticks together. As the virtue of patience increases in you, all the other virtues will increase too. Faith, hope, and love. That's John of the Cross. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a theologian. That's John of the Cross. John of the Cross is a doctor. What that means, he's kind of the bosses of all the theologians you run across. He's like a boss, authority for all the theologians. Now, they will have a problem because this is a generation, we're doing this in 2017, this is a generation that is very focused on individualism, personal choices, and it is almost in dissent. So there are going to be people out there that are very happy and they wear it as a badge. I dissented today. Well, they can dissent all they want to. My job is to tell you what was on the map and what has been taken off the map. And that is John of the Cross as a doctor, been labeled as a doctor, meaning his teachings won't harm you. You will not poison you. You will not get sick from them. You draw closer to the unknown God by practicing the virtue of patience. Patience with your spouse, patience with your kids, patience with whoever you work with. Who else can you be patient with, Seb?
Relatives, friends.
Huh? Friends?
Friends.
Friends. Be patient with friends. What if I ain't got no friends? Huh?
Yourself.
Be patient with yourself. There you go. And you're laughing at that. And so if you don't have any friends except like me, then be patient with yourself. But in any case, patience. Think of two sticks. That's natural law. Rubbing and friction. You're being patient. You're being patient. You'll get lights. God can infuse knowledge. God can infuse love into you. So there is this God that many people say don't exist. Well, test it. Test it. Be patient. Be a better person tomorrow than you are today. And most people don't oppress somebody. Most people believe in the natural law that is wrong for one person to oppress another. You got that word, Sep? Is that coming out okay? Yeah. Oppress another. Wrong to oppress another. Don't oppress anybody. Be patient. Do good. Turn from evil. And you'll begin to get the other types of desires, and you'll desire maybe more of that patience. And that patience as a virtue will lead you to maybe a hope in a thing that you don't know of. And that begins to lead to a faith and a charity. And you begin to travel by a way you know not. So the desire. Fire. I gave you an example of heat and cold. You draw close or away from that fire by desire, and you do the same with God. You draw close or away from God by your desires. And if your desires become like damp wood, go from a fire to damp wood, we want to dry that back out. And you dry that back out. You dry your soul out that has become damp with wrong appetites. You draw that out by putting your appetites back on God. Patience. Patience is the number one way to dry a damp soul, according to John of the Cross. Now, if you're talking to somebody else, and if they've got and they're considered a doctor and a saint, just ask them, are you a saint? Are you a doctor? They're not if they're alive. They might be if they're in the, you're seeing visions of them. And how do you say that, Seppi? If you're seeing them in dreams and visions. But if they're alive and you're talking to them, they're going to tell you, oh no, I can't claim that I'm a saint. Oh no, I can't claim that I'm a doctor yet. I'm not talking about a PhD. I'm talking about someone above a PhD, beyond that, who's been time tested to give truth and knowledge to multiple generations. John of the Cross was one of those guys. And this Garrigou Lagrange called John of the Cross a master of all three parts of the spiritual life. The beginning, the purgative, the middle, the illuminative, and the unitive. Father Dubé liked to call them the three conversions. Okay, John of the Cross is considered the master of all three. Not all saints are. Not all saints are masters of all three parts of that spiritual life. So we talked about it. God exists. You can have that desire no matter how dirty you feel that you are, whether you've got any kind of sin, murder, abortion, whatever you got in your background, God can come beyond that. God created you, okay? And he is a jealous lover. God desires you more than you desire him. So if there's desires that are awakening, rest assured that God desires you. And if you're desiring God and you've gotten beyond that and you know and you believe and you have faith and hope, you're desiring God, be certain that God, that desires from God, and he's trying to grow it. He's searching for you and striving for you more than you are striving for him. So there's no part of the body of Christ that cannot be sanctified. I mean, cannot be drawn from desires of not God onto God. There's no part of creation that is beyond the dominion of God. No part of creation that's beyond the dominion of God. Don't become a slave of the possible. The tyranny of the possible. I mean, only do what's possible. Oh, I got to wait until it's the right time to do this tape. Oh, I got a headache. Oh, I got to grow another couple inches before I, play basketball. Look, that's the tyranny of the possible. Stretch. Ask, stretch. Ask if you have a conviction and you believe this is the right thing. You see something, say something. We're in the United States. That's a big thing about Homeland Security. See something, say something. You don't have to wait until you can act. You see, you say. You see good, you can say that's good. You see evil, you can begin to make visible the sins of omission. But if it's in the right time, meaning if you're just coming to a knowledge of God and you're into purgation, you're in cancer treatment, you're fighting for your life, look, you got enough to deal with right then and there, okay? Most people drawing closer to God try to do a great deal of things, and in formation, you stay focused on your duties, okay? So, but when I'm saying you see something, do something, you're not to run out and write a 4-volume book about what you saw in the ordinary course of events. Ordinary course of events, you just use common sense. Common sense. And that may mean that if you're in a bad situation, you keep your mouth shut. So I want you to understand that. I want you to understand. Common sense may mean take your medicine. If you've been diagnosed with a mental illness and you've been told to take medicine, take your medicine. Okay? So remember that you can become magnificent, and God is a magnificent tree. And we talked about that before, and we'll talk about that more. We discussed the silkworm. We discussed your desires drawing closer to God, and we talked about how St. Paul was used, and he was a murderer. You can be used too. You can know happiness in this life, and you can have peace. Is that a wrap?
Yes.
Okay, stay tuned for our next discussion. We're going to talk about God's creation, oak trees and acorns. Okay, you're going to like it.